Don't say that much.
Okay, so we're going to talk about the cells today and their teeny tiny parts. There are three main parts to the cell: the cell membrane, the nucleus, and the cytoplasm. So here's a representation. You will be able to see these things under a microscope. It's very exciting. However, this is not what it's really going to look like. This is just a representation of artist rendition, so to speak. So there you go. So there's three main parts, but of course there's many other parts, and they're called organelles, also known as little organs. Each organelle does a very specific job to make the cell work. Here's that photo of the animal cell. Cell membrane is the very first one we're going to talk about. It's the outer covering that surrounds the cell. It is the thin skin or barrier around the cell. And it has three main jobs. Protects the cell, gives it its shape, lets in nutrients, lets out waste. If the cell is damaged, that may cause disease. So this is one of the reasons why I need you to understand just the organelles, because in your disease project, you're going to be thinking about these things. What specifically about the cell is the problem? Here. So let's take a closer look. So you'll see here the nucleus and the cell membrane and different parts of it, mostly the cytoplasm. So we'll see things passing through, passing out. Okay, semi-permeable. What does that mean? Semi means partly, permeable means able to pass through. This is why I gave you that Latin sheet about science, because a lot of things, including other words that you don't necessarily have in science, you can break them down in Latin. So if you know what those things mean, then you can sort of translate it for yourself. So it lets some things out and some things in. Why does it do that? Well, let's imagine this is the outside of the cell and the inside. Let's say we want to get some nutrients inside. The body has broken them down, lets that in, no problem. But these guys don't have the password. They can't get through. Bacteria, viruses, things that foreign invaders. So they don't want to let those inside the cell. So that semi-permeable nature of the membrane is very helpful. Next, we're going to talk about the nucleus. It contains the genetic material. We all know that as DNA. Oh, my slide doesn't, it's very clear there, but it's DNA. It's the functions of the cell. It controls all the functions. It is the brain of the cell. And here we have an animal with a nucleus and a plant cell. You will be able to see this. The reason why they're blue and green or purplish is because they've been stained. They're not really those colors. This is also a plant cell, so you're able to see the nucleus there. Next, we're going to talk about the cytoplasm. It holds all of the organelles safely inside the cell. It is like the jello that holds everything in place. Let's take a look at the picture. Here we go. So that's the same picture of the animal and the plant cell, but just looking at a different organelle. That's the cytoplasm. So next we're going to talk about the ER, the endoplasmic reticulum, lesser known. It modifies or changes proteins made by the ribosomes. It also makes fats and gets rid of poison. Lesser known, but let's look at the picture and see if you remember what it was like. So it's that little ribbon-looking maze thing. You can see the ribosomes are represented by those little black dots all over that ER, and it's if you can see really the picture, that's a larger version that's right outside the nucleus, inside the cell. Okay. In the mitochondria, it changes the food molecules into energy. So we know from the characteristics of life that all living things need energy. So the mitochondria is basically that organism that does it. It's really called the power plant of the cell. Here's a representation of it. Kind of looks like a lima bean to me. Okay, Dr. Golgi, can't remember what year, he discovered the Golgi bodies. So when you're famous and you discover something, you get to name something after yourself. They modify processed proteins that will be taken out of the cell. and they sort, package, and transport proteins out of the cell. Vacuoles. They store food, water, and other liquids. They're like the storage tank of the cell. This is a representation of an animal cell. You can see that there's many vacuoles in this particular cell. The lysosome. It's a special type of vacuole, similar, but it has digestive chemicals. It breaks down food molecules, waste, and foreign invaders. So it's sort of scrubbing them. So that's where you get that word Lysol, breaking them down so that we can get rid of them. Cleaning them up, so to speak. So it's like the garbage can, the cleaning lady, whatever you want to call it, of the cell. Cleaning man, maybe, I should have said. All right, the plant cell, let's talk about that. There's a couple of organelles that are different that only the plant cells have. So, first is the vacuole. Although animal cells have them, the difference with the plant cells is that they are much larger. And you can see in this picture that's a much larger vacuole. Also here, and the next one, and they're storing that water. So let me move on to one of the more important organelles for a plant. It's super important. The chloroplast. It uses sunlight, energy to make food. And that's done through photosynthesis. We all know that from our 4th grade elementary school classes in science. Chloroplasts contain the chlorophyll to make plants green, but they're basically creating their own food. It's fantastic chemistry, if you ask me. I can't believe it. It's amazing. So only plant cells have this chloroplast. And if you look here, those little green organelles that are represented by the chloroplast. Last but not least is the cell wall. And we know that the animal cells have the membrane, but in addition to plant cells have the cell walls. The rigid layer around the cell membrane in plants. And only plant cells have these things. So for instance, in trees, they're able to grow much taller because of those cell walls. They become rigid. And gravity, and won't allow that to fall down. So that's a good thing. Also, it's the sort of like the fiber that we eat that we really can't digest, so it passes through us. But it is much more rigid than the cell membrane that an animal cell has. So let's go a little bit back when we talk about the animal and plant cell, because it's easy for us to see under the microscope. But if we want to go back to basic biology, we need to talk about another type of cell that you haven't heard about, but you know what it is. And that one is called a prokaryote. So there's 2 main types of cell. One is the prokaryote. The second is eukaryote. Now, the prokaryotes are much smaller than the animal or plant cells, which are, again, the eukaryotes. They don't have a nucleus. They also lack most of the organelles that the plant and animal cell have. They have a circular DNA. So I'm going to show you a much larger version of what it looks like. This is a artist rendition again. So here we have the circular DNA in the middle, the cytoplasm, which sort of holds it together. It's not labeled, but you've got a membrane around it. The ribosomes, which allows it to make copies of itself, its own DNA, so to speak. And so let's see how it moves around. Let me show you what that is. It's called the flagella and the cilia. Let me show you a picture of that. So this little tail-like thing is called the flagella, and these little feet-like things are called the cilias. And that's how they move through your body, through air, through water, through what we call the primordial soup of when the earth was made, because these were the most basic cells. And you'll learn when we find out about evolution that these cells, these very primitive cells, were around for millions of years. and led to life as we know it today. So they're our friends in a way, and relatives. Prokaryote cells exist only as single-celled organisms, and all bacteria that we know of, well, all bacteria are prokaryotes. Let's talk about bacteria for a second. I don't have pictures on this slide. It's a mistake. Some are harmful, but most actually are beneficial. In fact, in your body, there's about 10 to 1 bacteria of regular human cells. So you have lots of different kinds of cells, like you have hair cells, you have skin cells, you have digestive cells, bone cells, etc., etc. We'll talk about that later in the year. But in addition to those kinds of specialized cells, you have all this bacteria in your body, and it's about 10 to 1. So let me show you a picture of that. I'm going to skip these couple slides. I will show you the information. You can read it, but we covered it in depth with the plant and animal cells. We know that they are much larger than the bacteria and the prokaryote cells. Let me show you the photo of that now, and then we're almost done. So here we go with the top box being the prokaryote cell. That is a picture of E. coli, which is a type of bacteria. And that is what makes you sick, food poisoning. I'm sure you've heard of it before. So this is, and the bottom one is a eukaryote cell, it's yeast. So you can see that the top one, the prokaryote, is 2,000 times magnified, and it's still much tinier. And the bottom one is only 250 times magnified. So there you go. You've learned everything. I'm going to skip these 2 slides and show you the last pictures. Here's the plant and the animal cell again. And we've just covered all the standards that the state of California would like you to know, that you know that cells function similarly in all living organisms, that you know that the characteristics that distinguish plant cells from animal cells are chloroplasts and cell walls. You know that the nucleus is a repository for genetic information, so that's your DNA. Don't forget that. You know that the mitochondria liberate energy for the work that cells do, and chloroplasts capture sunlight through photosynthesis. You know that cells divide to increase their numbers through process of mitosis. Well, we haven't covered that. Next video. So that's a very fascinating thing. And in fact, I'm going to teach you guys a dance, the mitosis dance, through 2 daughter cells. And then you know that multicellular organisms develop and their cells differentiate. So thanks a lot for watching, and we'll see you in class.